Hello everyone, welcome to the video. Avid Assistant here, and in this one we're going to be looking at a new update that's dropped for Avid Media Composer this week, which is 2023.8, since we're in August of 2023. And at first, when I first looked at the features and saw them in the What's New in Avid PDF, I was quite excited. You know, there was a bunch of new stuff. There was improvements to, phrase find, ScriptSync that we haven't seen added to in quite some time. A bunch of new little improvements that I had been asking for, but I wager that some of these are going to be more useful to some than others. Some are only going to be useful if you have a very specific workflow, and some of them are really useful all around. You know, it's a bit of a mixed bag. But let's dive in. We'll have a little play and a little test of each feature, and we'll go through the What's New in Avid PDF as well, and we'll take a look at everything that's new so that you're all caught up on what's going on with Avid. So here we go. So first thing I noticed when I went to launch Media Composer is that they've changed the little splash screen here. Not something that really means anything or changes anything for any of us, but just thought I'd point it out. I'll also point out that the qualified operating systems that can work with Media Composer are now all the way up to the latest in both Windows and Mac. Previously, the last version, 2023.3, was only qualified up to 13.4, so if you've been holding off to update to the latest macOS and just kind of ignoring that software update notification, you can now do that, and feel free. Now, quickly, there's a couple of little points that I want to point out before we get started. I usually leave this at the end of the What's New videos, but I'm going to put it just a really quick summary at the beginning here. I highly recommend, before you update, that you run the uninstaller of Media Composer. You'll find that in your applications, Avid Uninstallers, Media Composer. Run the uninstaller, install your current version, go to the download center of avid.com in your account, download the newest installer and install it that way. Then upon launching Media Composer, you're going to want to create a new user profile. This is something that I do at the start of, every new release of Avid. You'll see here that I actually have the version of Avid in the name of my user profile each time. That just helps me keep track. And this will almost guarantee you a much smoother experience and a lot more bug-free experience. And it actually segues nicely into the first new edition in 2023.8. Since if we go to create user profile here, we now get a pop-up with 3 different options. So recently we did get added the option of transitioning from Premiere Pro, where it will create a user profile with all of the Avid counterpart to the Premiere tools roughly placed geographically on your monitor real estate in the same place that they would be on the default layout in Premiere, to sort of help people who are transitioning over. And now we also have another new option of Media Composer Classic. So I'll select this and create one just to sort of show you, and then I'll open up a project here, doesn't matter which project, and you'll see it's basically just reorganized the Media Composer layout to work just like old Avid. So all of my windows are floating. The docked and tabbed paneled interface is, heavily minimized and reduced. Our effect palette and our settings are docked with our project window up here, just more or less like they used to be. I've done several videos showing you how you can reconfigure your Avid to work just like the old one, and this is more or less just a preset that does all of that and puts it all back, so you don't have to do any reconfiguring. Now, there is one other thing about this that the Avid have added back from the old classic UI, and that is our middle mode buttons here in the Composer window. These had more or less been removed ever since the new UI kicked in June of 2019, but they're back now, and they are put there by default if you have the Media Composer Classic layout enabled, but we also have the option within our user settings under Composer to enable those middle Composer buttons, regardless of our user profile and whether we're using docked tab panels. We can have that there or not. So that has been, put back as yet another step towards making users still hanging on Avid 2018 or earlier a bit more comfortable about migrating to the newer versions. But I myself am not a fan of the old layout. I have come to very much embrace the new one, so I'm going to create another new user profile for 2023.8, using the new one. So under my user settings, create user profile, I'm going to select Media Composer, not Media Composer Classic, and I'll just call this Avid Assistant 2023 2023.8. Sweet. Now, just before we start rattling through a whole bunch of new features, I do want to remind everyone that once you create your new user profile, that you can bring over your keyboard and some minor settings from your old one. And to do that, simply bring up your settings window, go to User, and then you can go Command O or Control O, or just go to the File menu and open Setting File. In order to open the settings of your old user profile. These are generally stored in a shared folder on your system drive or your C drive. So I'm going to go Mac HD, Users, Shared, Avid Media Composer, the one without any spaces, Avid Users, and here we are. So I can see here Avid Assistant 2023.3. So I'll jump into that one. So that's the old one that I've been using for the last several months. And then once you go in here, the only one we can select is the XML. So just select the XML and hit open. And then once you do, you'll have a window pop up, which is essentially the user settings of that user with all of the configured user settings. So you can see my export presets, my keyboards, bin views, stuff like that. Now, I definitely do not recommend you bring over everything here, otherwise it can defeat the point of creating the new user profile. You can bring over bugs and conflicts between the settings and the different versions, since the way these settings work are usually tweaked slightly between each version. But the one that's pretty much always safe to bring over is your keyboard. So I've got two keyboards here. I've got one for editing and one for effects work. So I'm going to drag those over. I'm going to hit add. I don't want to replace anything, just leave what's there. I'll tick that as the default keyboard to be on my current settings. And then I always find it's quite safe to bring over bin views as well. So I will grab some of my bin views and bring them over too. Now, a lot of people want to also bring over their export presets. And if it's an incremental update, this is something that is kind of hard to recommend one way or the other. I have seen a lot of bugs come about as a result of doing this in the past when export settings have been tweaked between versions. I've also seen it work perfectly fine if it's an incremental update and not much has changed there. But as a point of principle, I just always make a point of recreating all my export settings each time. Since I'm saving headaches, it's not going to take me too long, even if it's a half day at the beginning of a project. Since I, as well as doing it between versions on my home system, I'll create a new user profile at the beginning of every project. But if it's important to your workflow, if you've got a whole bunch and you don't want to spend a long time recreating them, you can try bringing some over. But if you do start to get buggy behavior, then I'll recommend creating a new user profile again and manually rebuilding those export settings. But anyway, I've banged on about a bunch of prep stuff and updating protocol and things like that, quite enough at this point. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes updating this new user profile with a couple of other little things that I like in order for me to navigate the user interface a little faster. And then we're going to get into probably the biggest new feature that's been talked about, the ScriptSync and phrase find AI changes that have been made. So just a moment, be right with you.
A wee minute later.
Right, so if you've seen any of the documentation for the newest version, you'll have noticed the term AI added to the end of ScriptSync and phrase-find. Now, I find this to be a slight misnomer since ScriptSync and phrase-find were always a form of AI anyway, and they have been for a long time. The only thing that I can tell after having this new version for a short amount of time that is particularly new is the ability to create a transcript from a clip. So we can now automatically create transcripts, and it's going to create a script bin like we use in ScriptSync of a clip based on the phonetic indexing that phrase-find is already doing. So let me show you in a little demo here. So I'm going to take one take here of this short film, and I'm just going to right-click on the clip in the bin and click on Create Script from Clip. So as soon as I do that, we'll start getting a little progress bar window will come up saying indexing. It's going through the phonetic index and it's building the transcript. And when this is complete, we'll end up with a script bin, like we're familiar with, or you may not be familiar with, from ScriptSync. I have a video demonstrating how ScriptSync works and how to use it if you're not familiar, but with an Avid generated transcript built for everything that has been spoken on that particular clip. So here we have it just here. I'll undock that, make it a bit larger so as you can see. So here we have the clip, we have a transcript of what's been said, and we have a number of script marks. So say here's a line where they've called action, and then the first dialog line is Jerry, what's all this? So I can double click on the script mark there to jump straight to that line.
Action. Jerry. What's all this?
There we go. Now, if I want to go to a line that's a little bit further along, say I need to take care of this, that you'll be able to see here. Again, double click on the script mark.
I need to take care of this.
And there we go. So I haven't imported any scripts. I haven't made any scripts. Avid has scanned the dialog, made a little transcript for me just here. And I'm also able to click on my edit script button, and I could copy all of this, and then I could paste it into a Word document, Google Doc, whatever else, to send to someone. Now, I imagine that this is going to be particularly useful in unscripted workflows for things like interviews. The only thing I would say in that regard is that the indexing can take a little while. So if you have a particularly long clip, if you have a 30, 40-minute interview, let it scan, let it do its thing, walk away, come back, and then you'll have a transcript within a script bin in your Media Composer that you'll be able to navigate your clip through a lot faster. I will also point out though that since this is a phrase find script sync feature, this will be limited to the Ultimate bundle of Avid Media Composer. It will not be present in Avid Media Composer Standard. And while you can create folders to organize your script bins within your project that way, depending on how many transcripts you do, you may end up with a lot of these script bins. But don't worry, there is other ways to manage these. If you're just looking to cull through and delete some scripts, you can go to the script menu, manage transcripts, and then you'll be able to clear all of the transcripts for any given project at any time. Just by clicking on a project and hitting delete, you'll be able to wipe all the transcripts that have been done in that project. You can also navigate your way there from the find menu, just by going Command F or Control F on Windows, and then hitting the little gear wheel down here, and then manage transcripts. Now, I'll also point out while I'm in the find window here that if I search for, say, a line that was in my transcript there, like Jerry, what's going on? Let's search for that, and I'll click on Phrase Find AI. Then trusty old Phrase Find has found all the clips where that is spoken, and we even get a transcription column showing the exact line in question. And if I double click on any of these clips here, it's going to take me straight to that clip, load it in the source monitor right at that point where that line is being spoken. So we'll see here, 1 Charlie take 4 is a separate clip than what we were using before. That was 1 Kilo take 2. So I'll load that up and then hit play.
Jerry, what's going on?
And there we go. Works quite nicely. So we've still got our classic phrase find. We can still scan all of our text, but now I've also got the option to create transcripts on top of that. Hunky dory. Right, now next up is a sort of a feature that I can't quite demonstrate as of yet because it's a change to the code within Avid Media Composer. There is a new panel SDK, software development kit that Avid is providing to third parties for the development of plugins that will allow greater control over the user interface, particularly the paneled interface within Avid, opening up external plugins in Avid to be able to do more things. Since we know that classically within Avid, a plugin is only really able to control things from the effect editor or allow us to link stuff in, via the AMA or source browser linking. So hopefully this is going to lead to more exciting plugins that are able to do more things within Avid. Only time will tell. Moving on. Right, now moving on here is an interesting one that I think is going to make a few people happy. We now have a bit more options in terms of our audio splitting. So here I am using a Blackmagic Ultra Studio monitor. You can see here when I open up my hardware menu, there it is, and it's ticked and it's enabled. I have a client monitor over there that is displaying picture. But we also have this option up here now called desktop audio that we can enable at the same time. So I'll disable that just to show you what I mean here. So say I was in a sequence and I wanted to record some temp ADR using the audio punch-in tool. If you're not familiar with this audio punch-in tool, I did recently have a video going through all of the sound tools within Avid as part of the Avid Basic series, so you can check that out if you've not used this before. But for those who have, you'll know that if we had a client breakout box for our client monitors, like a Blackmagic Ultra Studio Mini, then it caused some issues with using the audio punch-in tool. Like we could only select Blackmagic as an audio source, as an audio driver, and it meant that we would have to disable that while we were recording, so we couldn't have our client playback out while we're watching and doing audio recordings. You can see that that's still the case right here, but as soon as I go to my hardware menu and I enable desktop audio, and you'll see the input source has already changed. And if I open up this drop-down menu, I now have a whole bunch of options. I have the microphone from my iPhone, since that's tethered to the Mac. I have, this USB microphone, another audio device I've got plugged in, and any other sort of USB audio devices or any audio devices connected to your machine that you want to use, you'll have that option there, and you'll be able to record audio in sync while you're using a breakout box at the same time. So yeah, that is a feature that a number of editors that I do know are going to be happy about, since it's something they've been asking for a while. Right, now the next up feature is a bit of an odd one. It's called the batch subclip tool. And when I first saw that, just from the name, I got a bit excited. I thought this is something that's going to be really be able to help assistant editors to batch create their subclips during the syncing process. So if you had made a sync map, kind of like this one, where you have a whole bunch of clips on a timeline in sync with the audio clips underneath them, I was hoping that this would be able to say batch create a whole bunch of subclips, choosing just the video that's on V1 and a certain number of audio tracks that are underneath it, and create a whole bunch of subclips for every piece of video that's on that sequence. That was my hope. But that's not what this is. Let me show you what it is instead. So I'm in a source picture bin here with a bunch of source master clips. I'm just going to demo this with 3 of these clips here. You'll notice that in roughly the middle of each clip, I've put a marker, and I've also put some marks, just selecting a specific region. That will come into play in a minute. So with those 3 selected, I'm going to go right click, batch create subclips. And this is the menu that we get. So let's have a little tour. So at the top, we have a drop-down menu to select which bin our created subclips are going to end up in. By default, it's probably going to be the bin that you're currently in. So I'm going to just leave it at that for now. We can create subclips for the entire clip. So if you just wanted subclips of the master clips that you could rename, but you wanted to leave the masters as a source camera name, which is a fairly standard workflow, you can do that. You can also create shorter subclips based on markers that you have placed on the timeline. So I'm going to select that just for the sake of demonstration. You can select specific tracks here. Now, my source clips, I don't have any source clips available to me at the moment that also have sound. But this would be where it would come into play. Say you had been shooting single system, and so your sound was wired straight into the camera, and so all the camera clips had all of the sound ISO channels on them. You would be able to select just V1 and A1 that had the mix track on it, and create your subclips from there, and it would strip out all of the other audio channels on the subclips, but they'd still be present on the source. So that's where that would come into play here and become quite useful. Now, there's also this option to add or remove frames at the head and the tail. So say you didn't want to have to go through each one and apply markers at the head and the tail. If you're looking to remove a specific amount of time from the head and the tail, you have that option here. You can type in any value you like and add or remove there. And lastly, we have retain marks and retain markers. So if you're duping the entire subclip, you can retain any mark in and out that you have placed on there. And we can also retain any markers that you have placed on the source master clip. So I'm going to untick retain marks here, since we're subbing based on the marks. But I'll leave retain markers. And then when I hit OK here, we're going to end up with 3 subclips that are named the same, but are significantly shorter because they're going to be based on our marks, and they're still going to have those markers that we had placed on them at the same point. So when I hit OK, happens fairly instantly. There we go. And we have our .sub.01, and here we go. So I'll just sort these by name here just to make it a bit clearer. So you can see these are all significantly shorter than their originals. But if I open up each subclip, we still have our markers present. So yeah, quite a specific tool. As I said, I think this would be most useful for people shooting single system sound in the source camera, and they just want to preserve the master clips with the source naming, but they want to sub out to get specific sound channels on their subclips that they can rename to to whatever they like. Not something that I or my assistants could make much use out of in scripted workflows, but you never know. It's another tool to have in the toolbox. Right, now, again, this next feature, I'm not going to demonstrate, I'm just going to show here from the README, and that is changing monitor configuration duplicates the current workspaces. Now, I actually feel like I've sort of been doing this for the last couple of versions, as much as I've noticed. It doesn't appear to me to have changed in any particular, behavior. So I'm not sure quite why that's here, unless I'm probably missing something, but I can't see what has changed here, really. But what this is essentially doing is, say you had two monitors plugged in and you unplug one, it'll notice the change and it will duplicate, say you're in your edit workspace, it'll duplicate your edit workspace so that it doesn't mess with the current one, which was set up for two monitors. And then you'll have like a second edit workspace set up for that you can configure for a single monitor, and you'll be able to jump back and forth between them. And so that way, when you're in your Avid, and you go to your user settings and you go to the bottom, you'll notice that next to your workspaces, it actually lists the displays and the sort of aspect ratio, the sizing of the two displays as well, so that if this grossly changes, you'll have a duplicate of that workspace with the new measurements and number of displays as well that you'll be able to toggle back and forth between. So for example, my Avid is a MacBook Pro, and occasionally, like when I'm doing these videos, I'll use one monitor, but whenever I'm editing, I'll use two. So that could be useful if I was the type of person who liked this function. But generally I like to have some Avid tools on my other monitor as well, and I like to have a lot of control over things. So I this isn't a feature that I'm going to use a lot, but I'm just letting you know that it's there and it's in the README, and that's what it means. Right, now moving on from that, there's another feature that's been added here that is quite interesting, and it is a sort of further addition to a feature that was recently added called sequence templates. Now, if you're not familiar, if you didn't see the previous What's New video, or if you're not up to date on the newest Avid, you haven't tried it, here's a little recap of the sequence templates function. So if you're in a timeline, any timeline, and you sort of right click in the background, we can now create a sequence template. And so we could name this whatever we want. Say we want to name it assisting, first word that came to my head. You can then create a template with a specific track layout. Say you want 2 video tracks and you want 4 audio tracks. You can configure your audio tracks to be any kind of panning you want. If you want mono, you want stereo, you want 5.1 or 7.1 tracks, you can configure that. You can name each of the tracks, so they'll have their own names here. You can drag and rearrange them, and you can custom set what you want your starting time code to be. So I'll tend to use 00, 59, 30. That's a fairly standard starting time code for me. So you could hit save on that. And then when you go to create a new sequence, you can create it based on any template that you had. So if I create one based on assisting, which is what I just did, we have our 2 video tracks and 4 audio tracks, and we're starting at 59:30. So that is sequence templates. But now what we have is, say you selected the wrong one and you started working, or if you're taking over a sequence from someone else, we now have the option to reconfigure an existing sequence to a different sequence template. So I have another timeline here from a different project from earlier in the year that I can't really show or talk about, so I'll just park on the credits. But you'll notice that none of my audio tracks here are named, right? Now, if I right click in the background, I now have the option to apply a sequence template. So an existing sequence template that I have, I can apply it to a current timeline. So I'll apply this one called JEdit that I've made. And you'll notice it's now named all of my tracks, because in that sequence template, my tracks were all named. And it is a very quick way of actually naming your tracks. So I've got 5 dialogue tracks, then sound effects up to A10, 2 for music, and then I had a track down here for track effects, which looks like by the end of the edit I never actually used anyway. But, you know, nifty little feature if you're looking to reconform a timeline. And not quite as exciting as when the initial sequence templates was introduced. I'll have the version that was introduced up on screen just now. I have found sequence templates to be very useful, but reconforming a sequence to an existing template, if it doesn't have the same number of tracks, will still end up requiring a bunch of manual work of moving things around anyway. There's sort of no way around that. Right now, one interesting quality of life improvement here that has been added is if you hover over any icon, then previously it would just display the name of that function, but now it will also display the keystroke, the actual physical key on your keyboard that you can hit to enable that function. So say rendering an effect here, I've got that mapped to Shift R. So here we go, we can see Shift R. Effect editor, effect mode, I have mapped to number 4 on the numeric keys at the top row of the keyboard. So if I hover over that, you can see it says 4. So even if you've remapped it to a different key, it will display the correct key to enable that function. So if it's a function you don't really use too much and you've just forgotten where you've mapped it, but you know it's on your keyboard, you can hover over it for a second and Avid will remind you where it is. So you don't have to open up the keyboard and go to your user settings and have a look around for it to find out. Small improvement, but appreciated. Nice one, Avid. Right, now the next one is an interesting one, and this involves the audio mixer. So I'll bring up my audio mixer here, and I'll jump to a portion of my timeline where we have some sound going on, over here. And you'll see that our sliders, as always, and in many NLEs, they only go up to plus 12 dB. So if you're looking to add gain, make a clip louder, we can only go up to plus 12. Or up until now we could. So even though our slider says plus 12, we can actually click down here and type in a numeric value up to plus 36. So we can make a clip a lot louder. Now, a couple of little asterisk things to note about this function here. First off is that you can't enable your sliders to show up to plus 36. No matter how much you stretch the audio mixer, it's still just going to say plus 12 at the top. So any function above plus 12, even if it's, just plus 13, will have to be typed in. Second, and more important to note, is if you are working with another Avid user on the same project who is on any version previous to this, so previous to 2023.8, then I wouldn't recommend you do any, gain adjustments above plus 12. Because say if I was to, add this up to say plus 20, and then I sent the bin over to my friend who's working on version 2023.3 even, it's going to revert to 0 dB at their end, because the previous Avid won't be able to interpret that audio gain, that high, and so it's just going to reset the audio changes. So one little thing to be aware of, if you're working on your own and you're on this new version, go for your life. Feel free to blast your sound up to its clipping and distorting if you like, and any AEFs that you send to sound or ProTools sessions that you export directly out of Avid, these gain levels will be preserved when they come into ProTools later on as well. So we're all hunky-dory on the post-sound front. Right, now the next feature listed in the README is LFE only mono tracks. So we should have the ability now in our audio mixer to designate any mono track on your timeline as LFE only. And LFE is referring to low frequency effects. So in, like, for example, a surround sound mix, like a 5.1 mix, the .1 essentially is the 6th channel for your LFE. So it's just for those rumbly, low frequency sounds that are going to go to your subwoofer to create that, more fuller sound. And we can now designate a track to be LFE only. Now we're supposed to have this option in the context menu of the audio mixer. I'm sure I'm missing something here. I'm not blaming Avid, but I just haven't come across it yet. These are all mono tracks. Again, it's not currently set up for 5.1, but even if I changed it out to be 5.1, even at both ends, I don't seem to have... Right, so I'm an idiot. I just went back to the audio mixer and the feature is present, and it's quite obvious how to get it as well. You just have to set your audio mixer to be a 5.1 mix. And so then you can see up here we've got panning to go to the various surround spaces. Well, we can right click up here and then we can designate this track as LFE only. And so then all those controls will go away. And it's also perfectly backwards compatible with versions of Avid Media Composer going as far back as 2014, apparently, according to the What's New PDF. So, yay for that as well. Now, speaking of audio, there is also now the option in your audio project settings under the Effects tab to toggle on or off audio effects at any given time. So we can toggle on or off all track effects on your timeline. We can toggle on or off RT cues, volume effects, and clip gain. So probably mostly for playback if you're just looking to quickly get rid of those. And if you had a whole bunch of track effects on there, this might be the quickest way to do it. Not something I see myself using a whole lot, but I dare say there will be workflows where this is useful. So just know that you can toggle on and off audio effects and clip gain from your audio project settings now. Right, now next up is a small improvement to the ProTools session export that now allows the multi-mix tool as part of your ProTools session export. So let me show you what that is. So those familiar with doing mixdowns, particularly audio mixdowns, will likely know that you can do multiple mixdowns at the one time by going timeline, mixdown, audio, multiple mixes. And this brings up this multi-mix tool here. For example, I have a default setting here preset called stem mixdowns that will create 3 stereo mixdown tracks, one of all the dialogue, one of all the sound effects, and one with the music tracks. And then it wouldn't be uncommon for me to send to online as a reference file a QuickTime reference that just had those 3 mixdown tracks as all of the sound, and also selecting the direct out option. So they would end up with 3 individual tracks containing the dialogue, the sound effects, the music, and they could toggle each one on and off at their will. Quite useful for online as a reference. Now, in terms of our Pro Tools export, if I go File, Export, and I will configure a Pro Tools session here, and then we'll go to audio details of this Pro Tools session export. You can see we can add an audio mix down here. We've been able to do that for a while because it gives the Pro Tools and Soundpost guys some guide audio from our offline mix. But we now have the option here, instead of just giving them a mono or a stereo mix, we can do multiple mixes. So we're now essentially able to give them dialogue, sound effects, and music stem files as part of the Pro Tools session that we export. So they would get all of our tracks as it's placed, and there would likely also be 3 tracks at the bottom on top of it that have, you know, our stems or mixes that we do in the multi-mix tool, and we can do that directly as this one package on export. Now, of course, you've always been able to do this on your timeline before you do the export as like a tidy up, but you know, we now have this baked into our Pro Tools session export setting as well. Now, another addition that's been made to our export settings here is some new long GOP options added for our XDCAM export. So when you're going File, Output, Export to Device, I'm not able to demonstrate this just now because I don't have an XDCAM device to plug in. But I can show you on the PDF here that what this will look like is the addition of a keyframe mode and a keyframe distance option inside your XDCAM export settings, allowing you for greater control over that GOP in the XDCAM. And lastly, another little nice small one is we're now able to make an optimized EDL in the list tool that contains up to 4 audio tracks. So you'll see here in my input, I will select V1 and I'll select 4 audio tracks, preview that there so we can see this here. And in our list options, we're still able to optimize EDL. This is the first change I've seen in quite some time to do with EDLs. I actually didn't think there would ever be any addition made to EDLs, but there you go. And let us not forget that on top of all the usual features and additions and tweaks that have been made, we have a whole suite of bug fixes that have been done. Fixing things from copying and pasting keyframes in the effects editor, all the way through to issues with the AEF, updating sequences, group clips. There's a whole laundry list here of things that have been fixed. So you can have a look through here and see if your most infuriating bug that you have found has indeed been quashed. But yeah, guys, that pretty much does cover us for this version. That is all of the new features that have been added. I know there's probably a number of people who have been checking maybe this video, Avid's website, the Avid users Facebook group, wherever else. I'm hoping that this is going to include long time requested fixes, like say native support for Apple Silicon, or of course fixes for the title tool. Now, I don't work for Avid, and while I may be part of a lot of groups and I talk to a lot of people, including some who work at Avid, and I read a lot of rumors, I do not have any official information on that. But what I can say in regards to those issues is that Avid does have all the resources that they possibly can on the title tool, and you can expect some updates on that in early 2024. That's probably around the time frame when I would expect to see a new version, and not probably a new version of Titler Plus. From what I've heard Avid say on the pages, we're looking at a whole new title tool to replace both the title tool application and Titler Plus with stability at its core. And a lot of work has already been done on that, and there's a whole lot of testing going on, but of course we want to make sure that they have the time to get it right, and so early 2024 is when we're looking at getting that. And on the note of Apple Silicon support, Avid has supported M1 and M2 machines for quite some time. I myself am running an M2 machine. I have been since February. I have cut broadcast shows on it with no issues whatsoever. So yes, well, it's still be technically running via Rosetta. I would just say, as long as you have a decent amount of RAM, Avid runs very, very well on Apple Silicon. So I wouldn't be holding out for native support since, it might give us some benefits and some speed and efficiency. It's not necessary. Avid runs excellently through Rosetta. But yeah, with that out of the way, guys, I think that has me exhausted everything that I can possibly say this week on this particular topic. I will send a heartfelt thanks to everybody who's watched the video. Very big thanks to everyone who's subscribed on Patreon and on the YouTube memberships as well. And a big shout out and thank you to the Avid developers who work tirelessly to fix all these bugs and bring us new features as well. I know not everyone is happy with new updates and features, but I've talked to some of those guys and they are working very, very hard, and it is quite a complex legacy program that's been going for a long time. So thank you very much, guys, and we really appreciate all the work that you do. As for me, I'm quite behind on a number of things, so I have got to get going and chase down some people for my next gig. Thank you for watching, and see you later.